My GF said, "If you don't ask me, I'll run back to my ex." So on Valentine's Day, I took her to dinner and dumped her at the exact moment she thought a ring was coming. The moment she gave me that ultimatum, my entire future fractured. She thought she had me cornered, but my response wasn't what she expected, and what came next was a Valentine's Day I'll never forget. My name is Ethan, and I'm 32. I never thought I'd be sharing a breakup story like this online, but this whole situation was so absurd, I still can't quite believe it happened. This is how I found myself in a position where the woman I thought I loved tried to manipulate me into marriage, using her wealthy ex-boyfriend as leverage, and how I made a decision that changed everything. Our story began about 2 years ago at my cousin's wedding in downtown Boston. It was one of those huge, lavish affairs, 300 guests, an open bar, and a DJ who clearly loved the Cupid Shuffle way too much. I was trying to avoid my aunt's questions about my single status when this absolutely stunning woman walked up beside me and ordered a vodka cranberry. Her name was Olivia Riley. She was 29, a marketing executive for some hot tech startup, and she had this incredible presence that just made heads turn. We started chatting. She actually laughed at my terrible jokes about the wedding cake. By the end of the night, we were dancing to songs we both pretended to hate. It honestly felt like something straight out of a rom-com. That first year with Olivia was genuinely incredible. We traveled everywhere, Austin, Orlando, even flew out to Denver for a long weekend. We'd stay up late talking about everything, from deep philosophy to our favorite childhood cartoons. And the physical chemistry? Off the charts. She had this gorgeous apartment in Beacon Hill with huge windows overlooking the city, and I had my place in the South End. We didn't live together, but we were together almost every single night. Her friends adored me. My friends thought she was gorgeous and fun. Even my mom started dropping hints about grandchildren every time we had Sunday dinner. Everything just seemed perfect. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself, even as the first little red flag started to flutter around our 1-year anniversary. Looking back, I should have asked myself, how many times do we ignore the warning signs in a relationship, just because we're too invested to see them clearly? The marriage hints started subtly. At first, I barely noticed. Olivia would send me Instagram posts of engagement rings with captions like "just browsing," or she'd point out couples getting engaged at restaurants with this look in her eyes that, even then, made me a little uncomfortable. Then, her best friend got engaged, and suddenly, every conversation became about weddings. She started buying bridal magazines, leaving them casually on my coffee table when she stayed over, claiming it was just for fun. I tried to tell myself this was normal. We'd been together over a year, she was nearing 30, so marriage was obviously on her mind. But it slowly started to feel less like natural relationship progression and more like a calculated campaign. The hints escalated into direct conversations. She'd ask when I thought people should get engaged, what kind of wedding I'd want, how many kids I saw myself having. And every single time I tried to pump the brakes or say I wasn't ready to think about that yet, her mood would completely flip. She'd go from happy and laughing to cold and distant in a matter of seconds. Sometimes she'd tear up, accusing me of not taking our relationship seriously. Other times, she'd just go silent and leave my apartment without saying goodbye. The crazy part? The next day she'd act like nothing had happened. She'd text me good morning with heart emojis and suggest dinner, as if we hadn't just had a massive fight. I began to realize that Olivia had this pattern of emotional instability. She'd blow up, make me feel like the bad guy, then hit a complete reset, expecting me to just move on without ever truly resolving the issue. Her ex-boyfriend, Patrick, started coming up in conversations more frequently around month 15. At first, I thought she was just being open about her past. But then I noticed she only mentioned him when we were arguing about commitment. She'd say things like, "Patrick wanted to marry me," or "Patrick would have proposed by now." I'd just sit there, thinking how strange it was that she kept comparing me to a guy she supposedly didn't want anymore. I did some light social media stalking, because I'm only human. I found out Patrick was this super successful real estate developer who drove a luxury car, wore expensive suits in all his photos, and apparently still followed Olivia on Instagram, liking most of her posts. The whole thing gave me this sick feeling in my stomach. It seemed less like she was over him and more like she was keeping him as a backup plan, just in case I didn't work out. Around month 18, things got even worse. Olivia started making wedding venue visits. She'd come back and tell me about this beautiful barn in Vermont or an elegant ballroom downtown. I felt like I was being pulled into a current I couldn't escape. I tried to have an honest conversation one night at her apartment. I told her, I care about you, but I'm just not ready to think about marriage yet. And she completely lost it. She started crying and yelling that I was wasting her time, that she could be with someone who actually valued her, that her biological clock was ticking, and I was being selfish by not committing. I remember sitting on her couch, feeling like the villain in a movie I hadn't even auditioned for. When I tried to defend myself, she just cried harder and said I didn't understand what it was like to be a woman approaching 30. The next morning, she texted me, "I'm sorry. I love you," and suggested brunch, as if the entire fight had never happened. That's when I truly started to understand this pattern was never going to change unless something drastic happened. But I loved her, or at least I thought I did. So, I kept going along with it, hoping things would somehow get better on their own, which, looking back, was incredibly stupid of me. Then came the night that changed everything. And honestly, I should have seen it coming. Olivia had been extra sweet all week, cooking dinner at my place, being affectionate, not mentioning marriage once. I actually thought maybe we'd turned a corner. It was a cold night in January. We were sitting at my dining table, eating spaghetti she'd made. Everything felt comfortable and normal. Then she looked at me with this completely calm expression and said, "I need to tell you something important." My stomach immediately dropped. I knew whatever was coming wasn't good. Olivia put down her fork, looked me straight in the eyes with this eerily calm expression, and said, "If you don't propose to me by Valentine's Day, I'm going back to Patrick." The entire room went silent, save for the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. I sat there, frozen for a moment, trying to process what she'd just said. This wasn't a conversation or a discussion, it was an ultimatum, delivered like she was negotiating a business deal. The craziest part was how casual she sounded about it, like she was telling me what she wanted for breakfast. She explained that Patrick had been texting her recently, that he'd told her breaking up was the biggest mistake of his life, that he was ready to propose whenever she wanted. And she said all of this while looking at me like she expected me to panic and immediately pull out a ring. I could see in her face that she thought this was a brilliant strategy, that threatening to leave me for her rich ex-boyfriend would make me realize what I was about to lose and force me to commit. But instead, something completely different happened inside my brain. I looked at her, sitting there so confident and satisfied with herself, and felt this wave of clarity wash over me. It was so intense, it almost felt physical. I realized this woman didn't love me. She was trying to trade me like a stock that wasn't performing well enough. The thought kept running through my mind, if someone truly loves you, they don't threaten to leave you for someone else unless you marry them. They don't use another person as leverage to manipulate you into the biggest decision of your life. And they definitely don't set arbitrary deadlines like you're some kind of work project that needs to be completed by a certain date. I took a deep breath and said, "That's fair." And I watched her face light up with this triumphant smile, because she thought she'd won. She thought I was agreeing to her terms, and that a proposal was now inevitable. She reached across the table, grabbed my hand, and started talking about how she knew I'd understand, how we were going to be so happy together, how Valentine's Day would be perfect for an engagement. And I just sat there nodding, while my brain was already 3 steps ahead, planning something completely different. The rest of dinner was surreal. She was chattering away about wedding ideas and honeymoon destinations while I was having this intense internal conversation with myself about what I was actually going to do. Have you ever had a moment like that? Where everything suddenly becomes crystal clear, all the confusion just melts away, and you know, with absolute certainty, what you have to do? I wasn't thinking about buying a ring or planning a proposal. I was thinking about the fact that I'd just been given an ultimatum by someone who claimed to love me, and how fundamentally messed up that was on every possible level. The phrase that kept repeating in my head was that I wasn't being chosen, I was being forced. And once I thought that, I couldn't unthink it, because it was so obviously true. Olivia didn't want to marry me specifically. She wanted to get married before she turned 30, and I was just the guy who happened to be there. If I didn't comply, she had Patrick waiting in the wings like an understudy, ready to take my place. I realized that if I proposed under these conditions, I'd be walking into a marriage that started with blackmail. That would set the tone for the rest of my life, because she'd know that threatening to leave me was an effective tool to get whatever she wanted. That night, after I drove home, I sat in my living room until 3 a.m, just thinking through every possible outcome. I came to the conclusion that I had to end this relationship, but I had to do it in a way that was clean and final. I knew Olivia well enough to know that if I just broke up with her over text or at one of our apartments, she'd cry and manipulate and promise to change. I'd probably cave, because I'm not great with emotional confrontation. I needed to do it in a public place where she couldn't make a huge scene, somewhere neutral where I could say what I needed to say and then leave. And that's when the idea hit me. Valentine's Day was 3 weeks away, and Olivia was expecting a proposal at a nice restaurant. So, why not give her the nice restaurant and the public setting, just not the outcome she was anticipating? The more I thought about it, the more perfect it seemed, because she'd be so focused on getting engaged that she wouldn't see the breakup coming. By the time she realized what was happening, it would already be done. Over the next 3 weeks, Olivia was the happiest I'd ever seen her. She genuinely believed she'd manipulated me into proposing. And watching her walk around in this delusional bubble of confidence was almost sad. She got her nails done in this specific shade of pink that she said would photograph well with a ring. She kept leaving little notes around my apartment with her ring size written on them, like I might forget. She told all her friends that something big was happening on Valentine's Day. She bought a new red dress that probably cost $400. And she even made a hair appointment at some fancy salon downtown for the morning of. Meanwhile, I was systematically removing myself from her life in ways she didn't notice, because she was too focused on her fantasy engagement. I took all my stuff out of her apartment over the course of 2 weeks, just a few items each time I visited, so she wouldn't get suspicious. I changed my Netflix password, my Amazon password, and made sure my name wasn't on anything of hers that could cause problems later. I called my buddy Scott, who's a lawyer, and asked him hypothetically if there was anything I needed to worry about legally when breaking up with someone. He told me as long as we didn't live together and didn't have any shared assets, I was fine, which was a huge relief. The hardest part was booking the restaurant. I wanted somewhere nice enough that she'd believe a proposal was happening, but not so expensive that I'd regret spending the money when I broke up with her instead. I settled on this Italian place called Giovanni's in the Seaport District. It had white tablecloths, dim lighting, and was known for romantic dinners. When I made the reservation, the host asked if we were celebrating anything special. I said, something like that, which felt darkly funny at the time. I also told my brother what I was planning, because I needed someone to know in case Olivia tried to spin some crazy story afterward. He thought I was insane, but also said if I was going to do it, at least make it memorable. I guess I took that to heart. The week before Valentine's Day, Olivia started acting extra sweet and affectionate, probably to make sure I was still on board with proposing. She kept saying things like she couldn't wait for our special day with this knowing smile that made my skin crawl. She had no idea that I'd already mentally ended the relationship and was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. And there was something almost peaceful about having made the decision, because all the anxiety and pressure just evaporated. Valentine's Day finally arrived. Olivia texted me early in the morning saying, "Today is going to be perfect," with about 15 heart emojis. I just responded with a simple "see you tonight," because I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to tip her off. She spent the entire day getting ready. She went to the spa, got her hair done in elaborate curls, put on the red dress and these expensive heels. When I picked her up at 6:30, she looked absolutely stunning, and completely convinced she was about to get engaged. The drive to the restaurant was torture. She kept talking about how romantic the night was going to be, how she'd always remember this day, how grateful she was that I'd finally come around to her timeline. I just gripped the steering wheel and focused on the road. We pulled up to Giovanni's. The valet took my car, and as we walked toward the entrance, Olivia grabbed my arm and whispered, "This is perfect." And I thought to myself, she's right. It really was perfect, just not in the way she imagined. The hostess led us to a corner table that was probably the most romantic spot in the entire restaurant, with candles flickering and a perfect view of the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Olivia was practically glowing with anticipation as she sat down and smoothed out her red dress. She kept looking at me with these expectant eyes, like she was waiting for me to drop to one knee right there, before we even ordered drinks. I could see her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the menu and pretended to read it, even though I knew she wasn't processing a single word. The waiter came over and took our drink orders. Olivia got champagne, because, of course she did. I ordered a beer, because I needed something to keep me grounded in reality while this whole surreal situation played out. When the waiter left, she reached across the table and put her hand on mine, and started talking about how she'd been thinking about this moment for so long. How she knew we were meant to be together, how Valentine's Day was always her favorite holiday. I just nodded along while mentally rehearsing what I was going to say. The appetizers came out about 15 minutes later, some kind of fancy bruschetta that Olivia barely touched because she was too nervous and excited. I ate mine slowly, because I knew that once these plates were cleared, everything was about to change. I waited until the waiter took away our appetizer plates and promised the main courses would be out in about 10 minutes. That's when I made my move, because the timing needed to be perfect. I reached across the table and took both of Olivia's hands in mine. Her eyes immediately filled with tears of joy, because she thought this was it. This was the moment she'd been manipulating me toward for months. She was already starting to smile, that huge, engaged girl smile I'd seen on Instagram 1,000 times. I took a deep breath and said, "Olivia, I need to tell you something important." She nodded enthusiastically, like, yes. Say it. Ask me. I looked her right in the eyes and said, "I don't want to marry you. I never want to marry you. And this relationship is over." I watched her face go through about 5 different emotions in the span of 2 seconds. First, there was confusion, like she didn't understand the words I just said. Then there was shock as the meaning started to sink in. Then disbelief, like surely this was some kind of joke. Then anger, as she realized I was completely serious. And finally, this raw devastation that almost made me feel bad, except I remembered why I was doing this in the first place. She pulled her hands away from mine like I'd burned her and just stared at me with her mouth open. For maybe 10 seconds, she didn't say anything at all, which was the longest I'd ever seen Olivia go without talking. Then the questions started pouring out in this frantic stream, asking what I meant, asking if this was because of the ultimatum, asking if there was someone else. I calmly explained that you don't threaten someone with their replacement if you actually love them. I told her that the moment she gave me that ultimatum about Patrick, she'd shown me exactly what I was worth to her, and that worth was conditional, coming with a deadline like a business contract. I said that marriage should come from love and mutual choice, not from blackmail and manipulation, and that I refused to start a life with someone who'd already proven they'd use emotional pressure to get what they wanted. Olivia's face went from pale to bright red, and she started getting loud. Not quite yelling, but definitely loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over with concern. She said I'd wasted her time, that I'd led her on, that I'd promised her a future. I just sat there thinking about how none of that was actually true, because I'd never promised anything except to be honest about my feelings. She accused me of planning this whole thing just to humiliate her. And honestly, she wasn't completely wrong about that, because I definitely could have broken up with her at her apartment or somewhere private. But I also knew that doing it publicly meant she couldn't guilt me into staying or manipulate me with tears in the privacy of one of our homes. The waiter approached our table, looking uncomfortable because he could obviously tell something was wrong. He asked if everything was okay, and I said we were fine and asked if he could bring out any dessert that might have been ordered ahead of time. Olivia looked at me with this confused expression because she had no idea what I was talking about, but I had a strong suspicion based on how confident she'd been that something special was waiting in the kitchen. The waiter nodded slowly and disappeared back toward the kitchen, looking relieved to escape the tension. Olivia stood up from the table and said, "You're going to regret this," with a venom in her voice I'd never heard before. She grabbed her purse, and I could see her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone. I assumed she was calling an Uber, because there was no way she'd sit through dessert with me now. And honestly, it made me wonder, have you ever made a decision that felt ruthless in the moment, but was absolutely necessary for your future? She stood there next to the table for what felt like an eternity, probably waiting for her ride to show up, and neither of us said a word, because there was nothing left to say. Then the waiter came back out, carrying a small plate with what looked like a custom chocolate dessert. As he got closer, I could see words written across the top in elegant white frosting. He set it down on the table, and the words "Say Yes" were staring up at both of us. The whole situation became so absurd that I almost started laughing. Olivia had apparently pre-ordered this dessert weeks ago, probably right after she gave me the ultimatum, assuming I'd proposed during dinner, and that this dessert would be the perfect moment to celebrate our engagement. The waiter stood there, looking deeply confused about why a couple who was clearly breaking up had an engagement dessert. Olivia's face went from angry to completely mortified as she realized what had just happened. I looked at the dessert, then at her, and said, "That's really something." I could see her trying to decide whether to run out of the restaurant immediately or stay and try to salvage some dignity. She chose to leave. She turned and walked as fast as she could in those expensive heels toward the exit. I sat there alone at the table with this Say Yes dessert and the attention of half the restaurant on me. The waiter came back after a moment and asked if I still wanted the check. I said yes, and apologized for the scene. He actually laughed and said he'd seen much worse breakups during his years at Giovanni's, which made me feel slightly better. The bill came out to $147, which felt like a small price to pay for my freedom. I left a $40 tip, because that waiter had definitely earned it dealing with our drama. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no phone calls, just me and my thoughts processing what had just happened. When I got back to my apartment, I felt this overwhelming sense of relief, like I'd just escaped something terrible. Olivia started texting me around 10 that night. First with angry messages about how I'd humiliated her in public, then with sad messages about how we could work things out if I'd just listen. Then with threatening messages about how I'd ruined her life and everyone would know what kind of person I really was. I read the first 10 messages just to make sure there wasn't anything urgent, and then I blocked her number, because I was done engaging with the drama and manipulation. I found out later, through a mutual friend, that Olivia had told everyone I cheated on her, which wasn't true. But most of our mutual friends could see through her version of events, because they'd witnessed her behavior patterns over the years. That same friend told me that Olivia had gone back to Patrick within a week of our breakup, which honestly just proved my point about her having a backup plan all along. She didn't need time to grieve or process. She just moved laterally to her next option, exactly like I predicted. The aftermath was quieter than I expected, because I braced myself for more drama. But apparently Olivia was too busy with Patrick to keep focusing on me. My life slowly returned to normal over the next few months. I started going out with friends again without worrying about her reactions. I focused on my work. I even went on a few casual dates, though nothing serious. About 6 months later, that same mutual friend reached out and told me something that made the whole experience feel almost poetic. Apparently, Olivia had pulled the exact same ultimatum move on Patrick. She'd given him a deadline to propose or she'd leave, probably using me or some other guy as the threat this time. And here's the kicker, Patrick broke up with her, too, because nobody wants to be manipulated into marriage, regardless of how much they might care about someone. I never reached out to Olivia again. And I never regretted my decision. Looking back, the only thing I regret is not ending it sooner, when the red flags first started appearing around that 1-year mark. The whole experience taught me something valuable about relationships and self-respect that I wish I'd understood earlier. Someone who truly loves you will never force you to prove it on their timeline with their conditions. And they definitely won't threaten to replace you if you don't comply with their demands. Walking away from manipulation is always the right choice, even when it's hard, even when you're invested, even when everyone around you thinks you should just go along with it to keep the peace. There's a difference between compromise in a relationship and surrendering your agency. And I'd crossed that line so many times with Olivia that I'd almost forgotten what healthy boundaries looked like. That Valentine's Day dinner cost me $147 and a 2-year relationship. But it bought me something infinitely more valuable. It bought me back my self-respect and my freedom to choose a partner who wants to build a life with me, not someone who wants to force me into one. There's only one thing more expensive than leaving a toxic relationship, and that's staying in one and paying for it with years of your life that you'll never get back. And I'm grateful every day that I chose the cheaper option. But honestly, what would you have done in my shoes?